Everyone was certain the interview would end in complete disaster when a single father walked into the room with his little daughter in his arms. Colleagues exchanged glances, whispered to each other, already ready to dismiss him as a failure who didn't know the boundaries between work and personal life. But at that very moment, the Millionaire CEO, known for her icy sternness and ruthless decisions, suddenly rose from the table, looked him straight in the eyes, and took a step that made everyone in the room gasp. Lucas Reed had rehearsed what he would say 100 times on the bus ride to downtown Los Angeles. But none of that mattered now as he stood in front of the gleaming glass tower of Monroe Labs with his 4-year-old daughter tugging at his hand. He had planned for everything: copies of his resume, a pressed shirt, even a portfolio of small coding projects he had cobbled together between courier shifts. But he had not planned for the babysitter to cancel at the last minute. He had not planned for Mia to cling to him with sleepy eyes and insist, "Daddy, don't leave me." So here he was, walking into the marble lobby with a small child at his side, feeling the weight of every stare. The receptionist raised an eyebrow when she saw the girl, but Lucas simply gave his name and tried to steady his breathing. He had one shot at this. He could not afford to fail. He had promised himself he would never let Mia see him break, not after everything they had been through. The nights he had fed her cold cereal for dinner, the days he had run delivery routes in the rain, the endless ache of trying to be two parents in one body. When the elevator opened and he stepped into the conference room, the murmurs began. A few recruiters whispered, one cleared his throat with annoyance. At the center of the long table sat a young woman he recognized instantly from every business magazine cover he had seen in the last year. Harper Monroe, the 25-year-old CEO who had turned inherited money into a technology empire. She was younger than most of the managers glaring at him, but the quiet authority in her posture was undeniable. She glanced up from a file, her brown eyes sharp, then softened when they fell on Mia. The little girl, with her hair in 2 uneven braids and her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, stared right back at Harper. "Are you nice?" Mia asked, her small voice piercing the room's tense silence. Someone snickered. A recruiter tried to cover it with a cough. Lucas felt his cheeks burn, but before he could apologize, Harper smiled faintly. "If your dad does well," she said, "I'll be better than nice." "I'll be fair." Lucas guided Mia to a chair in the corner, with crayons and papers someone reluctantly provided, then sat down across from Harper. The questions came quickly, sharp and unforgiving. Explain the code structure of his last project. Demonstrate how he would solve bottlenecks. Detail his experience with distributed systems. He answered steadily, though his heart pounded. He didn't dress it up, didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He told them about the app he built for Mia's daycare, about fixing bugs at 3 in the morning after his courier shift, about teaching himself new frameworks on a second-hand laptop. He spoke plainly, not with desperation, but with the quiet resolve of a man who had nothing left to lose. At the far end of the table, Harper's expression didn't flicker. She listened, eyes intent, as if weighing more than his words. The recruiters murmured again, one scribbling notes about risk factors. Someone whispered, "Single parent, unstable household." Lucas clenched his jaw but didn't respond. He had expected this. Then Harper closed the folder in front of her. "You're the only candidate who isn't trying to impress me," she said quietly. "You're just holding up the sky for your child." Her gaze shifted briefly toward Mia, who was coloring diligently, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth. Harper straightened in her chair. "Here's my offer. 1 trial month, flexible hours. We'll set up a children's room in the office, my expense. And tonight, join us in the cafeteria. I want to see how you handle arguing with my engineers." The room erupted in murmurs of protest, but Harper's word was final. Lucas sat frozen for a moment, the enormity of it washing over him. He had come expecting rejection, humiliation at best. Instead, he had been given something rarer than a job. He had been given the chance to prove that he and his daughter deserved a place in a world that had already written them off. As he rose to leave, Mia ran to his side, clutching his hand. She looked up at Harper with a smile. "See? I told you Daddy's smart." For the first time that day, Lucas allowed himself to smile too. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first step out of the shadows they had lived in for far too long. And something in Harper's steady gaze told him that this was not just the beginning of a job. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. On Lucas's first official day at Monroe Labs, the hum of the office felt overwhelming. Glass walls revealed clusters of developers hunched over their laptops, engineers scribbling frantic diagrams on whiteboards, project managers darting in and out with clipped tones and endless lists. The company pulsed with the energy of invention, but also with the tension of deadlines and expectations. Lucas carried his worn backpack on one shoulder, Mia holding tightly to his hand, her eyes wide as saucers as she took in the bustling world around her. The receptionist had already been briefed, and instead of skeptical looks, she offered Mia a basket of crayons and a tablet with child-friendly apps. A newly prepared room down the hall had been converted into a children's corner, complete with beanbags, a small bookshelf, and toys that still smelled of fresh packaging. Lucas felt a sting in his chest when he saw it. Someone had actually followed through on Harper's promise. Harper herself was already on the floor when he arrived, sleeves rolled up, leaning over a group of engineers clustered around a massive screen. She was pointing to lines of code with an intensity that silenced the group. Her presence was magnetic. Though she was the youngest person in the room, no one dared to challenge the certainty in her tone. When she turned and spotted Lucas, she didn't offer the polite smile of a CEO greeting a new hire. Instead, she gave a nod, sharp and almost conspiratorial, as though saying, "You're one of us now. Let's see what you got." Lucas sat at a workstation with a laptop far newer than anything he had touched before. The technical lead gave him a rundown of the project, a distributed platform that required optimization under massive traffic loads. It was the kind of challenge Lucas had only dreamed of tackling, one he used to scribble ideas about in notebooks between delivery shifts. He buried himself in the code, forgetting the world, fingers flying as he pieced together solutions. Hours passed unnoticed until a small hand tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, juice," Mia whispered. He blinked, realizing he hadn't taken a break since morning. Before he could stand, Harper appeared beside them, holding two cups, one coffee for him, one orange juice for Mia. She crouched down to the little girl's level, her sleek white blouse brushing the floor tiles. "Do you like it here?" she asked softly. Mia nodded, her braids bouncing. "I have crayons and a shark book." "Good," Harper said with a smile that reached her eyes. "We'll keep it stocked with more books if you promise to share with other kids who come by." Lucas watched the interaction, unsettled. This wasn't the polished CEO from the magazines, the woman who turned inherited wealth into a corporate empire. This was someone who knew how to look a child in the eye and make her feel seen. He wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck in his throat. Later that evening, after most of the office had cleared out, Lucas was still debugging a stubborn issue when Harper appeared in his doorway. She had changed out of her heels, walking barefoot across the carpet, her hair slightly loosened from the day's chaos. She leaned against the frame. "You've been here for 12 hours. That's not sustainable." Lucas rubbed his eyes. "I'm used to long days. It's fine." "It's not fine," she said evenly. "Burnout ruins good engineers and good fathers." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the air shifted. "Take Mia home. She needs dinner that isn't vending machine crackers. And you need to remember you're more than what you produce here." Her words struck him harder than any lecture. No boss had ever told him to be more than work. No one had cared enough to. He closed the laptop reluctantly, gathered Mia into his arms, and turned to leave. Before he walked out, Harper spoke again. "Tomorrow, bring your ideas to the design meeting. Don't hold back because of titles. If you've got something, I want to hear it." The next morning, Lucas did exactly that. In the conference room, surrounded by seasoned engineers with pedigrees he couldn't match, he outlined his approach to solving a bottleneck issue. He expected resistance, maybe even ridicule. Instead, Harper cut through the chatter with a firm hand. "Listen," she commanded. "He's right. This solution cuts latency by 30%. Build from here." The room fell silent. Lucas felt his pulse race as eyes turned toward him with something new. Not doubt, not pity, but respect. Harper met his gaze briefly, and in that small nod of acknowledgement was something electric. Days turned into weeks, and an unspoken rhythm grew between them. Lucas worked tirelessly, but with purpose now, each solved problem a step toward proving himself. Harper pushed him, challenged him, but also shielded him from the cynicism of others on the board. Mia became a fixture in the office, adored by developers who took breaks to show her doodles on their tablets. Sometimes Lucas would glance up from his screen to see Harper reading to her in the children's corner, her voice animated, her laughter unguarded. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Harper lingered in the empty cafeteria. Lucas sat across from her, Mia asleep on his lap, the hush of the city around them. Harper traced circles on her coffee cup absent-mindedly before speaking. "Do you know what it's like?" she asked quietly. "To have your whole life scripted for you? To be told you're special, but only as long as you meet expectations?" Lucas studied her face, the vulnerability in her eyes. "No," he admitted. "I know what it's like to be told you're nothing. And to spend every day proving you're not." Their eyes locked, something unspoken flickering between them. Two people from different worlds, yet bound by the weight of caring more than anyone ever should. Harper looked down quickly, breaking the tension with a small smile. "That's why I hired you. Not the resume, not the answers. You don't fake things. You fight for them." Lucas swallowed hard, his throat tight. He wanted to ask her why it mattered to her so much. He wanted to know why she looked at him like that, as if he was the only one who saw her as more than a CEO. But Mia shifted in his lap, murmuring in her sleep, and the moment dissolved. Still, as he walked out of the building under the city's neon glow, Lucas realized something had changed. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was the fragile beginning of something far larger, something neither of them was ready to name, but both of them already felt. Lucas woke before dawn to the sound of Mia's soft breathing beside him. She had crawled into his bed sometime in the night, clutching her rabbit to her chest. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and lay still for a moment, listening to the silence of their tiny apartment. It was a silence that always carried a weight, reminders of bills on the counter, of the jobs he had lost, of the wife he no longer had. Yet this morning, something was different. He had work waiting for him, real work that mattered. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't running in place. By the time he arrived at Monroe Labs with Mia's hand tucked firmly in his, the building was already buzzing. Engineers carried coffee like lifelines. Assistants shouted schedules into headsets, and screens lit up with cascading lines of code. Lucas felt both out of place and strangely at home. He guided Mia into the children's room, now decorated with new beanbags and a tiny easel that hadn't been there yesterday. She gasped with delight and immediately began painting swirls of color. He kissed her forehead, whispered, "I'll check on you soon," and left her humming happily to herself. The design meeting that morning was a battlefield. Senior engineers argued over technical priorities, their voices rising, their pride stifling collaboration. Lucas stayed quiet at first, absorbing their words, sketching possible solutions on his notepad. He knew his background didn't carry the weight of Stanford degrees or 10 years at Fortune 500 firms. But when Harper entered the room, everything shifted. The voices softened, postures straightened. She didn't sit at the head of the table. She stood, arms folded, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Continue," she said, and the debate resumed. But under her watch, it had a different tone. Still competitive, but now urgent, almost desperate to win her approval. When she called on Lucas, silence fell. He hesitated, his hand tightening around his pen. Every eye was on him, waiting for the rookie to stumble. Clearing his throat, he explained the bottleneck he had noticed and his proposed restructuring. He kept it simple, practical, grounded in tests he had run the night before while Mia slept. As he spoke, he saw Harper watching him, not impatiently, not critically, but with an intensity that unnerved him. When he finished, one engineer scoffed, "That's naive. We need enterprise-level robustness, not back-alley hacks." Harper cut him off with a single raised hand. "He's right. This reduces latency by 30%, and it's implementable immediately. Build from here." The engineer's face reddened, but he fell silent. Lucas felt the rush of adrenaline surge through him. It wasn't just that his idea had been validated, it was the way Harper had said it, without hesitation, without apology, like she trusted him completely. That night, Lucas stayed late, refining his code while Mia curled up in the children's corner with her rabbit. Harper stopped by on her way out, carrying her jacket over her shoulder. She paused at the doorway, watching Mia sleep. "She's fearless," she said softly. Lucas looked up from his screen. "She doesn't know any other way to be." Harper's eyes lingered on the child before turning to him. You've done more for her than most families do with twice the resources. Don't ever forget that Lucas didn't know how to respond. Compliments made him uneasy, especially from her. He muttered a quiet thank you, but she didn't move to leave. Instead, she leaned against the wall, studying him. Do you ever let yourself stop? She asked. He frowned. Stop what? Fighting, surviving, carrying the weight like it's the only way to exist. Lucas set down his pen, irritation prickling under his skin. I don't have the luxury of stopping. Her expression softened. Maybe not. But you deserve it. The words hung between them, heavier than any technical debate. Harper pushed off the wall and finally left, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Lucas sat there long after, staring at his screen, but seeing only her face, the strange mix of steel and vulnerability in her eyes. Days bled into weeks, and the rhythm of their lives intertwined. Lucas worked, Mia laughed. Harper pushed everyone to think sharper, move faster. Yet cracks in Harper's armor began to show. Some evenings, Lucas would find her alone in the cafeteria, staring at untouched food, exhaustion etched into her posture. Once, when Mia ran up to her with a drawing, Harper's face lit up so completely that Lucas's chest ached. It wasn't the smile of a CEO. It was the smile of someone who had been starved of something simple. Connection, affection, family. And Lucas began to realize something terrifying. He was no longer just grateful for the job. He was drawn to Harper in ways he hadn't let himself feel for anyone since his wife died. It was in the way she defended his ideas without hesitation. The way she crouched to Mia's level and spoke to her as an equal. The way she looked at him like she saw more than a struggling, single father. But he also knew the risks. She was his boss. She was a millionaire CEO with a company to run and a reputation to protect. He was a man with second-hand suits and a child to raise. The gulf between them was wide, and falling into it could destroy everything he had built so far. One late evening, as the city lights flickered outside and the office finally emptied, Harper stood at his desk with her hands clasped behind her back. We're hosting a partner dinner next week, she said, her tone brisk but her eyes searching. Bring Mia. I want her there. Lucas blinked, startled. At a corporate dinner? Yes, she said simply. This company is built on real lives, not facades. I want people to see that he didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. But when she left, he sat in silence, his heart thundering. For the first time in years, possibility scared him more than failure. Because deep down, he knew. Something had already begun between them, something neither of them had dared to name. Lucas had just settled Mia into bed when his phone buzzed with an email notification. At first, he thought it was another late-night bug report from the engineering team, but the subject line froze him. Notice of custody petition. His pulse quickened as he skimmed the words, each one slicing into him like glass. Mia's biological mother, who had vanished years ago without so much as a phone call, had filed a claim to regain custody. She had resurfaced with lawyers, with money, and with accusations about Lucas's ability to provide a stable home. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dim light, staring at Mia's peaceful face, her rabbit clutched tightly against her chest. A knot of dread twisted in his stomach. For years, he had been the only constant in her world. Every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every whispered lullaby in the dark. It had all been him. Now, with the stroke of a pen, someone who had abandoned her might take her away. The next morning, Lucas arrived at Monroe Labs with shadows under his eyes. He tried to focus on code reviews, but his mind wandered to the petition. He hadn't told anyone yet, not even Harper. But she noticed. Of course she noticed. She had a way of reading the tension in a room, and when her gaze landed on him, it lingered. After the morning stand-up, she cornered him in the hallway. You're distracted, she said plainly. I'm fine, Lucas replied too quickly, eyes darting away. No, you're not. Harper folded her arms, her tone more gentle now. What's wrong? Lucas hesitated. Sharing this would make it real. It would expose the crack in his carefully constructed world. But Harper's eyes, steady and unflinching, pulled the truth out of him. Mia's mother filed for custody, he admitted, his voice low. She disappeared years ago, but now she's back, with lawyers. She says I can't give Mia a stable home. Harper's jaw tightened. That's ridiculous. You've built your entire life around her. She has resources, Lucas said bitterly. Money, influence, things I don't. For a long moment, Harper was silent, and Lucas braced for pity. Instead, she said, "Then she hasn't met me yet." The words jolted him. Before he could respond, she turned sharply and strode down the hall, her heels striking like gunfire against the tile. Within days, the media caught wind of the case. Headlines painted an ugly picture. Young CEO entangled with single-father employee. Conflict of interest? Photos of Harper leaving the office with Lucas and Mia were splashed across gossip sites. Commentators sneered that she was buying herself a ready-made family. The board of directors summoned Harper to a closed-door meeting. Lucas waited outside, pacing, until she emerged hours later. Her face was pale but composed, her expression unreadable. "They want me to step back from any involvement," she told him, "for the sake of the company's image." Lucas felt the ground tilt beneath him. Maybe they're right. Maybe I shouldn't have let this. He stopped himself before finishing the thought, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Her eyes snapped to his, sharp and wounded. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Don't you dare reduce what we have to optics." But as the days dragged on, the pressure mounted. Reporters camped outside Lucas's apartment. Neighbors whispered. At preschool, other parents stared when he dropped off Mia. He could feel the judgment pressing in on all sides. And then came the hardest moment of all, when Mia, with her innocent eyes, asked, "Daddy, am I in trouble? Did I do something bad?" Lucas's chest ached. He knelt in front of her, brushing a braid behind her ear. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Grown-ups are just confused, but I'll never let anyone take you away from me." That night, Harper showed up at his apartment unannounced. She was still in her work clothes, exhaustion etched into her features. "We fight this together," she said simply. "If the world wants to question your stability, then let them see mine. Let them see us standing side by side." Lucas wanted to protest, to tell her she didn't owe him this battle, that her career and reputation were too important. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw the same fierce determination he felt in his own heart. She wasn't offering charity. She was choosing them. It was in that moment, as rain tapped against the window and Mia slept in the next room, that Lucas realized something terrifying and wonderful. Harper Monroe wasn't just his boss. She wasn't just a powerful ally. She was becoming the anchor he hadn't known he needed. The one person willing to fight with him, not just for him. And though the storm was only beginning, for the first time since that devastating email, Lucas felt a flicker of hope. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polish, its vaulted ceilings doing little to soften the tension that pulsed through the air. Lucas sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped so tightly together that the knuckles had gone white. His suit was borrowed, one size too tight in the shoulders, but he had pressed it carefully the night before. Beside him, his attorney whispered reminders about keeping calm, about answering clearly, but Lucas barely heard. His gaze kept drifting to Mia, seated quietly in the gallery with a coloring book on her lap. She swung her feet, oblivious to the weight of the room, her little rabbit tucked under her arm. Across the aisle sat her biological mother, radiant in a tailored dress, her attorney towering beside her like a shield. She hadn't seen Mia in years, hadn't sent a card, hadn't even called, but now she sat with poise and entitlement, as if parenthood were a title you could reclaim on demand. Lucas's stomach churned at the sight of her, a mixture of old anger and fresh fear. When the proceedings began, her lawyer wasted no time. He painted Lucas as unstable, a man clinging to a life he couldn't provide. He cited the cramped apartment, the long hours, the childcare arrangements cobbled together. Then came the insinuations that Lucas was entangled with his boss, a millionaire CEO who had given him favors in exchange for a relationship. "This is not a stable environment for a child," the attorney thundered. "This is a man leaning on the influence of Harper Monroe to mask his inadequacies as a father." Lucas clenched his fist beneath the table. He wanted to shout that every meal, every bedtime story, every scraped knee had been his responsibility alone, that he had given up everything to keep Mia safe and loved. But his lawyer motioned for him to stay quiet. When it was his turn to speak, Lucas rose, his voice steady though his insides felt like breaking glass. He talked about the nights spent rocking Mia through fevers, the mornings she begged him not to leave for work, the way she curled into him when thunderstorms frightened her. He didn't embellish. He didn't paint himself as perfect. He told the truth plain and unvarnished, because truth was the only thing he had. Still, he could feel the tide against him. The opposing lawyer's words lingered in the air, heavy with insinuation. And then to his shock, Harper entered the courtroom. She had not been called to testify. The board had begged her to keep her distance. But there she was, striding past the rows of spectators, her heels clicking like a metronome of defiance. She wore no flashy jewelry, no armor of power, just a dark suit and the unshakable composure of someone who had already decided she would not be silenced. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Miss Monroe, you are not listed as a witness." "I requested to be heard," Harper replied calmly. "If this court is going to question my influence in this child's life, then I will answer directly." The opposing lawyer smirked, clearly expecting to expose her. But Harper was ready. She carried a folder thick with documents. Records of the company's childcare program, contracts showing Lucas had been evaluated and hired on merit, internal policies proving she had recused herself from decisions directly involving him. She laid each one before the judge with measured precision. "I am not buying a family," she said, her voice ringing through the chamber. "I am protecting an employee who works harder than anyone I have ever met, and a child who deserves more than to be used as a pawn in a legal game. You can question my decisions as a CEO, but you will not question the love this man has for his daughter. I've seen it. I've lived it beside him, and I will stand here as long as it takes for you to see it too." The courtroom was silent. Even the opposing lawyer faltered, flipping through papers that suddenly seemed flimsy against her resolve. The judge leaned back, studying Lucas, then Harper, then Mia, who had abandoned her coloring to watch with wide, trusting eyes. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of finality. "Custody remains with Mr. Reed." Petition denied. The gavel struck, and the sound echoed like thunder. Lucas exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His legs trembled as he sank back into his seat. Mia ran to him, clutching his knees, her little voice breaking the tension. "Daddy, can we go home now?" He gathered her into his arms, tears burning his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going home." As they turned to leave, Harper caught his gaze from across the room. For a moment, the noise of shuffling papers and murmuring voices fell away. He wanted to thank her, but the words seemed too small. She gave a single nod, a flicker of a smile, and in that look he understood everything. She hadn't stepped into that courtroom for appearances or for power. She had done it because she believed in him, in them, in something neither of them could deny anymore. Yet beneath the victory, Lucas felt the shadow of unease. The petition had been denied, but the world outside had seen it all. The headlines, the whispers, the judgment, they weren't going to vanish. And now Harper had placed herself directly in the fire with him. For better or worse, their lives were bound together. And though today had been a victory, Lucas knew the war was only just beginning. The morning after the custody hearing, Lucas expected to feel relief, but instead he woke to a storm. His phone buzzed nonstop with notifications. The headlines screamed from every major outlet: "Millionaire CEO risks empire for single father. Scandal or sacrifice. Harper Monroe in courtroom drama." Paparazzi photos of Harper entering the courthouse were plastered everywhere, with captions speculating about their secret relationship. Some painted her as a reckless young leader, blinded by personal feelings. Others twisted her defense into something sordid. When Lucas arrived at Monroe Labs, the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations hushed when he passed. Whispers followed him like shadows. Even some of the engineers who had once applauded his ideas now avoided his gaze. It wasn't hostility exactly, it was worse. It was doubt. Doubt about his worth, about Harper's judgment, about whether he was a distraction the company couldn't afford. Mia skipped along at his side, blissfully unaware, clutching her rabbit. She darted into the children's room with a giggle, but Lucas felt the sting of the stares that followed them. He wanted to shrink, to vanish, to shield her from the eyes that saw scandal where there was only family. Harper wasn't in her office. She was in the boardroom, her voice raised in rare anger. Through the glass wall, Lucas could see a dozen directors seated stiffly, their expressions tense as she stood at the head of the table. He couldn't hear the words, but the energy was unmistakable. Harper was fighting, again. For him, for Mia, for her own right to lead without compromise. Hours later, she emerged, her expression taut, her blouse wrinkled from the battle. She found Lucas waiting in the hall. "They want me to step back," she said flatly. "They think I'm compromised. That defending you made me weak." Lucas's gut twisted. "Maybe they're right," he said quietly, hating himself for the words. "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." Her eyes snapped to his, fierce. "Don't say that. You and Mia aren't a liability. You're the only thing that's made me feel like I'm not just a machine built to make money." He searched her face, torn between gratitude and fear. "But your company—" "Let it burn," she interrupted, her voice low but steady. "If it means protecting what matters, then let it burn." The intensity in her words shook him. He wanted to believe her, wanted to let himself fall into the space she was opening for him. But a lifetime of disappointment whispered caution. He nodded, but his chest ached with uncertainty. That night, he found her in the cafeteria long after the offices had emptied. She sat alone at a corner table, her hair undone, staring at untouched food. A tablet glowed in front of her with a fresh wave of headlines. Lucas slid into the seat across from her, the silence stretching between them. Finally, he spoke. "Why do you keep doing this? Why keep putting yourself in the line of fire for us?" Harper's gaze lifted, and for once there was no armor in her eyes, only raw honesty. "Because I know what it's like to grow up surrounded by people who care more about power than love. I swore I'd never let anyone I care about face that kind of emptiness alone." Lucas swallowed hard. "And you care about us?" Her lips curved into a tired but genuine smile. "More than I should. More than the board will ever forgive me for." The weight of her words hung in the air, electric and terrifying. Lucas wanted to reach for her hand, to close the distance between them, but Mia's laughter echoed faintly from the children's room, and he pulled back. The boundaries of their worlds were still too fragile. In the days that followed, the pressure mounted. Investors threatened to pull out. Anonymous blogs speculated about sleeping with the boss. Lucas received hate mail accusing him of using his daughter as leverage. Yet through it all, Harper remained unwavering. She defended him in meetings, shielded him from the harshest criticism, and stood taller than ever, even as cracks began to show in her composure. One evening, after a particularly brutal day, Lucas found her in her office, head in her hands. He hesitated, then stepped inside. "You can't keep carrying this alone," he said softly. She looked up, eyes glistening with something she rarely showed: fear. "And if I let go, then I'll carry it with you," he replied, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. For the first time, she didn't argue. She simply nodded, as if allowing herself to believe she wasn't as alone as she had always assumed. That night, as Lucas tucked Mia into bed, he realized something had shifted. The fight wasn't just his anymore. It wasn't just hers. It was theirs. And though the world outside might never understand, though the judgment and the whispers might never stop, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Together, they were stronger than either had ever been alone. And in that realization lay both the hope of salvation and the promise of even greater battles to come. The scandal broke in full force on a Monday morning. Lucas had barely dropped Mia off at preschool when his phone lit up with messages. Dozens, then hundreds. By the time he reached the office, the story was everywhere. A leaked article from a Business Insider blog claiming to have evidence of an inappropriate relationship between Harper Monroe and her unqualified employee. The piece was vicious, laced, with half-truths and outright lies. Photos of Harper reading to Mia in the children's room were splashed across the front page, twisted into proof that she was blurring lines between her personal life and her company. By mid-morning, news vans crowded outside Monroe Labs. Protesters gathered, waving signs about corruption and favoritism. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Employees whispered in corners, emails flew, and the board demanded an emergency meeting. Lucas felt every eye on him as he walked to his desk, the weight of their judgment pressing into his skin. Mia, thankfully, was oblivious, safe at school, drawing rainbows and sharks while the world outside turned into a storm. Harper summoned him to her office before the board meeting. She looked different, more guarded, her hair pulled tightly back, her suit sharp as armor. But her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. She slid a copy of the article across the desk. "They want me to cut ties," she said flatly. To remove you from the company and make a statement denying everything. Lucas stared at the headline, bile rising in his throat. And will you? Her jaw tightened. No, but it will cost me. He shook his head. Harper, this is my fault. I should step down. Maybe then they'll back off. Her hands slammed down on the desk with uncharacteristic fury. Don't you dare. Don't you dare give them what they want. This isn't about you being unqualified, Lucas. This is about control, about punishing me for daring to make choices they don't approve of. Lucas wanted to argue, but her voice carried a conviction that silenced him. She leaned forward, lowering her tone. I built this company from nothing but willpower, and I won't let them strip me of the one thing that's made it worth it. You and Mia. The words hit him like a blow, equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. Before he could respond, an assistant burst in, announcing the board was ready. Harper straightened, her mask snapping back into place. Stay here, she ordered softly. I'll fight this. The hours crawled by. Lucas paced the office, his nerves fraying with every passing minute. He thought of Mia, of her tiny voice asking if she had done something wrong, and his chest tightened. He couldn't let her carry the weight of this chaos. He couldn't let her see him crumble. When Harper finally returned, she looked pale but unbroken. She closed the door behind her and sank into a chair, exhaling slowly. They've given me an ultimatum. Step away from you, or they'll force me out. Lucas's stomach dropped. And what did you say? Her eyes met his, unwavering. I told them to call the vote. Shock rooted him in place. Harper, you can't. I can, she interrupted. And I did. If they want to strip me of everything I've built, let them. But I won't betray what matters to me. For the first time, Lucas saw her not as the untouchable CEO, but as a woman standing on the edge of a cliff, daring the world to push her. The weight of her sacrifice was overwhelming. He wanted to protest, to beg her not to risk everything for him and Mia, but the words died in his throat. Because beneath the fear, a truth pulsed in his chest. He didn't want her to walk away from them either. The board meeting stretched into the evening. Votes were cast, voices raised. In the end, Harper retained her position, but barely. Several major investors withdrew their funding. The company's stock dipped sharply. The victory was hollow, costly. That night, Harper and Lucas sat together in the quiet of her office. The city lights glowed through the glass wall, casting fractured patterns across her desk. She removed her heels, rubbed her temples, and finally spoke. They'll keep coming after me. After us. Are you sure you want to stay in this fight? Lucas looked at her, at the woman who had stood against a boardroom of wolves without flinching. He thought of Mia's laughter when Harper read to her, of the rare moments when Harper let her guard slip and revealed the loneliness beneath. He reached across the desk, his hand brushing hers, tentative but certain. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in weeks, Harper's composure cracked. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes glistened. She squeezed his hand, holding on as if it were the only anchor keeping her steady. They sat like that in silence, two people battered by storms but unwilling to let go. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Lucas knew one thing with clarity. Whatever battles remained, they would face them together. The weeks that followed were a blur of chaos and resilience. Monroe Labs became a battlefield of whispers and headlines, its glass walls no longer gleaming with promise but fogged with suspicion. Harper stood at the center of it all, taking every blow from the press, the investors, even her own board. But she never faltered in public. In private, though, Lucas saw the toll. Her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching. Her voice cracked late at night when she thought she was alone. But she wasn't alone, not anymore. Lucas carried his share of the weight. Every morning he walked past reporters camped outside the building, cameras flashing as they shouted questions about his relationship with Harper. Every evening he fielded calls from friends urging him to step down, to save himself from the storm. But each time he looked at Mia, coloring in the children's room or falling asleep in Harper's lap while she read aloud, Lucas knew there was no going back. He had finally found a life that felt whole, and he would not surrender it. The breaking point came during a shareholder summit, the grand hall buzzing with tension. The press had already declared Harper's downfall inevitable. Rumors swirled that a hostile takeover was imminent, that she would be ousted before the quarter ended. Lucas sat in the back row, Mia beside him with her rabbit clutched tightly. He had no place in this room of power brokers and investors, but Harper had insisted he be there. When she walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. She wore no jewelry, no mask of wealth, just a simple black dress and the quiet fire in her eyes. She didn't open with figures or forecasts. Instead, she began with a story. When I took this company over at 23, people said I was too young, too reckless, too naive. Maybe they were right. But I built Monroe Labs into what it is because I refused to accept that power was reserved for the chosen few. I believed in building something that mattered, that served real people, not just shareholders. And now you want to tear me down because I refuse to apologize for caring about one of my own. A murmur rippled through the crowd. She pressed on, her voice steady. Yes, I defended an employee. Yes, I stood by him in court. And I will tell you why. Because he is a man who has carried more on his shoulders than any of us can imagine. And because his daughter deserves a world that values love and sacrifice over image and profit. If you see that as weakness, then take this company from me. But if you believe in the vision that made us who we are, then stand with me, because I am done pretending that compassion is a liability. The room erupted, some clapping, some shouting. Reporters scribbled furiously. Lucas felt his heart slam against his ribs. He hadn't expected her to lay herself bare like this, to risk everything not just for him, but for the truth of who she was. The vote was close, but when the results were read, Harper remained CEO. The board couldn't deny the passion she had ignited in the room, or the groundswell of support her speech had stirred. Investors who had doubted her were swayed by the sheer force of her conviction. It wasn't a clean victory. Several major backers still walked away, but it was hers, one not with strategy, but with honesty. That night, the three of them returned to Lucas's small apartment, away from the skyscrapers and cameras. Mia curled up on the couch with her rabbit, drifting to sleep between them. Harper sat quietly, her bare feet tucked under her, staring at the flickering glow of the lamp. For once, she looked her age, not a CEO, not a millionaire, but a woman who had carried too much for too long. Lucas poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to her. You didn't have to do that, he said softly. Yes, I did, she replied, her voice tired but resolute. I was living a life that looked perfect but felt empty. Then you and Mia walked in and ruined everything. And I'm grateful every day that you did. Emotion surged in his chest, raw and unstoppable. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined. The silence between them filled not with fear, but with certainty. She leaned her head against his shoulder, exhaling as if she were finally safe. For the first time in years, Lucas didn't feel like a man barely holding the world together. He felt like part of something bigger, something stronger. Mia stirred in her sleep, murmuring, Daddy, Harper, before slipping back into dreams. Lucas kissed his daughter's hair, then looked at the woman beside him. The battles hadn't ended. The world outside would still whisper, still question. But here in this small apartment, with Harper's hand in his and Mia's soft breaths filling the air, he understood the truth. They weren't broken. They weren't liabilities. They were a family. And that was worth more than any empire. What I like about this ending is that it isn't about a fairy tale simplicity, but about a difficult, deliberate choice. It's not just the millionaire saved the single father. It's 2 people stepping toward each other from completely different worlds. She is a woman of power, accustomed to pressure and the cold rules of business. He is a father, worn down by the fight for survival, but still holding on to his love for his daughter. Their union isn't a romantic accident, but the result of courage. Her courage to defy the system and his courage to trust again. What makes the finale especially powerful is the focus on family. The little girl became the center around which 2 hearts connected. Not status, not money, not positions, but care, loyalty, and the desire to be present. This isn't a story of a wealthy woman rescuing someone weaker, but of 2 strong, wounded people finding in each other what they had been searching for all their lives, a home. And the most important part is that the ending leaves a sense of inspiration. Yes, the characters will face new challenges, and public pressure won't disappear overnight, but now they hold in their hands something that cannot be bought or broken: love and faith in each other. That is what makes the story heavy yet luminous, and the ending truly happy.